In today's video, we are going to learn about expansion and consolidation of British power in India. We are going to discuss all these topics in a comprehensive manner. Before starting our topic, let me tell you that it takes me a lot of time to prepare content for you. It was free of cost. Now it's your responsibility to do subscribe so that you will be remain updated for more topics. So let's start without any further delay of time. First of all, we will begin the British imperial history. So the entire imperial history of Britain can be periodized into the two phases. The first is empire stretching across the Atlantic towards the America and the North and the West Indies, and the second empire beginning around 1783, peace of Paris, and swinging towards the East Asia and Africa. The imperial history of the Britain started with the conquest of Ireland in the 16th century. The English then sprang up as the new Romans, charged with civilizing so-called the backward races throughout the world. For this, the post-Enlightenment intellectuals of the Britain in particular and Europe in general started certifying themselves as civilized vis-a-vis the Orient peoples and others. Owing to various special and situational forces, the nature of imperial ideology of British changed over the time, but its fundamentals remained the same. So we should know that was the British conquest accidental or intentional. Historians have debated over the fundamental query whether the British conquest of India was accidental or intentional. John Seeley leads the group which says that the British conquest of India was made blindly, unintentionally, and accidentally, and in a fit of absent-mindedness. The school of opinion argues that the British came to trade in India and had no desire to acquire territories or to squander, that is, the waste their profits on war waged for territorial expansions. The English is argued that they were unwillingly drawn into the political turmoil created by the Indians themselves and were almost forced to acquire territories. The other group says that the British came to India with a clear intention of establishing a large and powerful empire, a plan which they completed by working on it bit by bit over the years. They dismiss as propaganda the claim of the peaceful intent and political neutrality of the English East India Company in its early days. Both schools of opinion appear to be overstating their viewpoints. Initially, perhaps the company officials started acquiring territories just to promote and protect their trade interests equally. When they saw how factionalized their political situation was, they came to realize how easily they could pit one local ruler against another and began to interfere in the local politics and in the process acquire territories. But later on, the British politicians back in Britain and administrators sent by them to India worked on the clear desire and plan to acquire territories and establish an empire. The enormous profit from the trade in the East, notably India, attracted the English traders, the company, as it did not Europeans. As it did other Europeans. A desire for quick profits, personal ambitions of individuals can avarice, that means greed for wealth, and effects of politics development in Europe were some of the factors that made the British increase their political clout in India. At the times, they waged wars to protect their commercial interests, and at others they did so to protect their Indian allies from the attacks of potential rivals. B.L. Grover writes that Lord Wellesley restored the aggressive application of the subsidiary alliance system to extend British dominion in India as a defensive countermeasure against the imperialistic decisions of France and Russia. From 1798 to 1880, the British motives were consciously imperialistic. Lord Hastings further carried the policy of Wellesley and treated India as a conquered rather than an acquired country. Thereafter, the British seemed to be work on a set decision to conquer the whole of India and even some of the neighboring states. Now we are going to know about when did the British period begin in India. In the mid-18th century, India various historical forces were at work, consequent to which the country moved towards a new direction. Some historians regard that year of 1740 when the Anglo-French struggle for supremacy in India began in the wake of the War of Austrian Succession in Europe as the beginning of the British period. Some see that the year of 1757 when the British defeated the Nawab of Bengal at Plassey as a designated date. Still others regarded that 1761, the year of the third battle of Panipat, when the Marathas were defeated by Ahmad Shah Abdali, as the beginning of the phase of Indian history. However, all such chronological landmarks are somewhat arbitrary because the political transformation which began around that time took about 80 years to complete. For instance, we think that of 1761 that British would certainly come to mind because of their victory over the Nawab of Bengal at Plassey and over the French but we would not entirely write off the Marathas and would probably also consider the prospects of Hyder Ali. In fact, it was a period of Indian history which it would probably be a mistake to interrupt in terms of what we know in the present. Nonetheless, the circumstances under the British succeed are not clear, and the few bottlenecks which they faced were not a serious nature. It is in the paradox which makes the causes of British success in establishing an empire in India a matter of considerable interest. Let's know about the causes of British success in India. First of all, the entire process of expansion and consolidation of British power in India took almost a century. In these 100-odd years, the English used many diplomatic and military tactics apart from other mechanisms to finally emerge as the rulers of India. Both war and administrative policies were used by the English to impose their power over various kingdoms and finally to consolidate their own rule over the entire India. The British were not averse to using unscrupulous tactics to exploit a situation or a regional ruler to get their own way. The causational forces that factors for the success of British is superior army, military and strategy. The firearms used by the English, which included the muskets and cannons, were better than the Indian arms, both in speed and of firing and in range. On realizing this, many Indian rulers imported European arms and employed European officers to train their troops, but unfortunately the Indian military officers and the ranks could never match the English officers and English armies. In the absence of originality, the military officers and armies of Indian rulers became mere imitators, and after that the better military discipline and regular salary. The regular system of payment of salaries and strict regime of discipline were that means by the which English company ensured that the officers and the troops were loyal on their part. Most of the Indian rulers do not have enough money to pay salaries regularly. The Marathas at times diverted their military campaigns to collect revenue so as to pay their troops. Also, the Indian rulers were dependent on personal returns or a rabble of mercenary elements who were not amenable to discipline and could turn rebellious or join their opponents when their going was not good. After that, the civil discipline and fair selection system. The company officers and troops were given charge on the basis of their reliability and skill, and not on the basis of hereditary or caste and clan ties. They themselves were subject to strict discipline and were aware of the objectives of their campaigns. In contrast, the Indian administrators and the military officers were appointed on the basis of caste and personal relations, often disregarding merit and ability. As a result, their competence was doubtful, and they even often tended to be rebellious and disloyal in order to pursue their own interests. Brilliant leadership and support of second-line leaders. Clive, Warren Hastings, Elphinstone, Morno, Marquis of Dalhousie, etc. displayed rare qualities of leadership. The English also had the advantage of a long list of secondary leaders like Sir Eyre Coote, Lord Lake and Arthur Wellesley, who fought not for their leader but for the cause and the glory of their country. The Indian side had two brilliant leaders like Hyder Ali, Tipu Sultan, Chinchulij Khan, Madurai, Scindia and Yashwantrao Holkar, but often lacked a team of second-line trained personnel. Moreover, the Indian leaders was as much fighting against their one another as against the British. The spirit of fighting for a united cause was not their motivation. Thus, they often supported the British against the neighboring rulers. The consciousness of India was lacking. After that, they faced a strong financial backup. The income of the company was adequate enough to pay its shareholders handsome dividends and as also to finance the English wars in India. Furthermore, the England was earning fabulous profit from its trade with the rest of the world. This vast amount of resources in money, materials and men was available to the British in times of need thanks to their superiority in sea power. Nationalist pride and economically thriving British people believing in material advancement and proud of their national glory faced the weak divided amongst themselves Indians. So perfect of the sense of unified political nationalism, the lack of materialistic vision among the Indians was also a reason for the success of English company in India. Now we are going to discuss British conquest of Bengal. Bengal on the eve of British conquest. So the Bengal, the richest province of Mughal Empire, included present-day Bangladesh, and its Nawab had authority over the region constituting present-day states of Bihar and Odisha. Exports from Bengal to Europe consisted of raw products such as saltpeter, rice, indigo, pepper, sugar, silk, cotton, textiles, handicrafts, etc. The English East India Company had a vital commercial interest in trading in Bengal, as nearly 60% of the British imports from Asia consisted of goods from Bengal during the 1630. A regular contact of British with Bengal continued with the established factories in Balasore, Hooghly, Kasim Bazar, Patna and Dhaka. By the 1960th century, the foundation of Calcutta by the English Company completed the process of English commercial settlements in the Bengal. The company paid sum of 3,000 per annum to the Mughal Emperor, who allowed them to trade freely in Bengal. In contrast, the company exports from the Bengal were worth more than 50,000 per annum. In 1700, Murshid Quli Khan became the Diwan of Bengal and ruled till his death in 1727. He was succeeded by his son-in-law Sujauddin, who ruled till 1739. After that, for a year, 1739 to 40, Sarfaraz Khan, an incapable son of Murshid Quli Khan, became the ruler. He was killed by Al-Badri Khan. Al-Badri Khan after ruled till 1756 and also stopped paying tributes to the Mughal Emperor. Under the rule of these rulers, Bengal made unprecedented progress, so there were no factors too which made Bengal prosperous. For instance, the rest of India was disturbed by inter-border disputes. The Maratha invasion, Jat revolts and external invasions by Nadir Shah and Ahmad Shah Abdali, the reign of Bengal was fortunate enough to escape their challenges. The population of Calcutta rose from 15,000 in 1706 to 1 lakh in 1750, and other cities like Dhaka and Murshidabad became highly populous. Almost all the governors of Bengal strongly resented the special privileges enjoyed by the English Company, as it meant a huge loss to the provincial exchequer. So the friction between the English commercial interests and the Bengal government became the chief cause of a conflict between the two. During a short period, 1757 and 1765, the power gradually got transferred from the Nawab of Bengal to the British, with the latter defeating the former. Now Al-Badri Khan and the English. In 1741, Al-Badri Khan, the deputy governor of Bihar, killed the Nawab of Bengal, Sarfaraz Khan, in the battle and certified his position as the new Sobdar of Bengal by paying a large sum of money to the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah. Al-Badri Khan ruled for 15 years, during which he fought off the Marathas. The English took the advantage of Marathas incursions in Bengal by obtaining a permission from the Nawab to dig a ditch and throw up an entrenchment around their settlement of Fort William. Later, Al-Badri Khan's apprehensions were drawn to the Carnatic region, where the European companies had usurped all power. On realizing this, he had argued to expel the Europeans from Bengal, but he died in April 1756 and was succeeded by his grandson Siraj-ud-Dawla, the son of Al-Badri's youngest daughter. Now we know about challenges before Siraj-ud-Dawla. The youth just turned 20 years. Siraj inherited many troubles from his grandfather. He had a rival in his cousin of Nawab of Purina, Shaukat Jung, a hostile aunt, Ghasati Begum, a childless widow, a rebellious commander of the army, Mir Jafar, husband of Al-Badri Khan's sister, and an alarmed Hindu subject population. There was a dominant group in his court comprising Jagat Seth, Omid Chand, Rai Bala, Rai Dulrab, and others were opposed to him. To these internal rivals were added the threat to Siraj's position from the ever-growing commercial activity of the English Company. Impulsive by nature and lacking experience, Siraj felt insecure, and this prompted him to act in ways which provided counterproductive. He defeated Shaukat Jung and killed him in a battle, divested Gustati Begum of her treasures and secured her, and dismissed Mir Jafar, appointing Mir Madan in his place. A Kashmiri officer, Mohan Lal, was appointed as the overall administrator, and he acted almost like a prime minister. Now we are going to know about Battle of Plassey. First of all, we know the prelude of the battle. The officials of the company made rampant misuse of these trade privileges that adversely affected the Nawab's finances. The English fortified Calcutta without the Nawab's permission. The company further tried to mislead him and compounded their sin by giving asylum to their political fugitive, Krishna Das, son of Raj Balla, who had felt with immense treasures against the Nawab's will. The company on its part suspected that Siraj would drastically reduce its trade privileges in collusion with the French in Bengal. Thus, when Siraj attacked and seized the English fort at Calcutta, it brought their hostility into the open. Mention money may be made for here too much propagated black hole tragedy. Siraj Dawla is believed to have imprisoned for 146 English persons who were locked in the very tiny room, due to which 123 of them died of suffocation. However, historians either do not believe this story or say that the number of victims must have been much small. Now the the arrival of the strong forces under the command of Robert Clive at Calcutta from Madras. Strengthening the English position in Bengal, Clive forged a secret alliance with the traitors of the Nawab, Mir Jafar, Rai Dulrab, Jagat Singh, and influential banker of Bengal, and Omi Chand. Under the deal, Mir Jafar was to be made the Nawab, who in turn would reward the company for its services. The secret alliance of the company with the conspirations further strengthening the English position, so that the English victory in the Battle of Plassey, June 23, 1757, was decided before the battle was even fought. Due to the conspiracy of Nawab's officials, the 50,000 strong force of Siraj was defeated by the handful of Clive's forces. Siraj Dawla was captured and murdered by the order of Mir Jafar's son Miran. The Battle of Plassey placed at the disposal of the English vast resources of Bengal. After Plassey, the English virtually monopolized the trade and commerce of Bengal. Now the significance of the Battle of Plassey. As a result of this victory, Mir Jafar became the Nawab of Bengal. He gave a large sum of money plus the zamindari of 24 parganas to English. The Battle of Plassey had political significance, for it laid down the foundation of the British Empire in India. It has been rightly regarded as the starting point of the British rule in India. The battle established the military supremacy of the English in Bengal. Their main rivals, the French, were outside. They obtained a grant of territories for the maintenance of the properly equipped military force, and their prestige increased manifold. But there was no apparent change in the form of government, though the supreme control of affairs passed to Clive, on whose support the new Nawab, Mir Jafar, was entirely dependent for maintaining his newly acquired position. The sovereignty of the English over Calcutta was recognized, and the English posted a resident at the Nawab's court. Now the Mir Qasim and the Treaty of 1760. Mir Jafar was increasingly irritated by the interference of Clive. He entered into the conspiracy with the Dutch at Chinsura, but the Dutch were defeated and humbled by the English forces at Bidara in November 1759. The triarchy of Mir Jafar and his failure to make the payments due to the company annoyed the English. Meanwhile, Miran, the son of Jafar, died, and there started a fight for the Nawabship of Bengal between Mir Qasim and son-in-law of Mir Jafar and Miran's son. One Sitarat, the new governor of Calcutta, agreed to support Mir Qasim's claim after the treaty between the Mir Qasim and the company was signed in 1760. Important features of the treaty are: Mir Qasim agreed to cede to the company the districts of Burdwan, Mindapur and Chittagong. The company would get half of the share in Chunam trade of Sachlet. Mir Qasim agreed to pay up the outstanding dues of the company. Mir Qasim promised to pay a sum of rupees 5 lakh towards financing the company's war efforts in southern India. It was agreed that Mir Qasim's enemies were the company's enemies and his friends the company's friends. It was argued that the tenants of the Nawab's territory would not be allowed to settle in the lands of the company, and vice versa. Under the pressure of the company, Mir Jafar decided to resign in favor of Mir Qasim. A pension of rupees 1500 per annum was fixed for Mir Jafar. What are the steps taken by Mir Qasim? Mir Qasim was a blessed Nawab among the successors of Al-Wadri Khan. After assuming power, Mir Qasim shifted the capital from Murshidabad to Munger in Bihar. The move was taken to allow a safe distance from the company at Calcutta. His important steps were recognizing the bureaucracy with the men of his own choice, remodeling the army to enhance its sickness and efficiency. Now the Battle of Buxar. First of all, we will know the prelude to the battle. The company had thought that Mir Qasim would prove to be an ideal puppet for them. However, the Mir Qasim believed the exceptions of the company. Ram Narayan, the deputy governor of Bihar, was not responding to repeated requests by the Nawab to submit the accounts of the revenues of Bihar. Mir Qasim could not tolerate this open defense for his authority, but Ram Narayan was supported by the English officials of Patna. The misuse of companies dastak or trade permit, a permit which exempted the goods specified for payments of duties by company officials, also resulted in tensions between the Nawab and the English. The misuse of dastaks meant the loss of tax revenue to the Nawab. It also made the local merchants face unequal competition with the company merchants. By an imperial farman, the English company had obtained the right to trade in Bengal without paying transit dues or tolls. However, the servants of the company also claimed this same privileges for their private trade. The company's servants also sold dastak to Indian merchants for their commissions. Besides, they used coercive methods to get goods at cheaper rates, which was against the spirit of duty-free trade. The duty-free trade simply meant buying cheap in otherwise competitive market. Mir Qasim decided to abolish the duties altogether, but the British protested against this and insisted upon having preferential treatment as against other traders. The Nawab Company tussle over the transit duty led to the outbreak of wars between the English and Mir Qasim in 1763. The English gained successive victories at Katwa, Murshidabad, Geria, Suti and Munger. Mir Qasim fell to Awadh and formed a confederacy with the Nawab of Awadh, Sujauddaulah, and Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, with a view to recover Bengal from the English. Now the battle. The combined armies of Mir Qasim and Nawab of Awadh and Shah Alam II were defeated by the English forces under the Major Hector Munro at Buxar on October 22, 1764, in a closely contested battle. The English campaign against the Mir Qasim was short but decisive. The importance of this battle laid in the fact that not the Nawab of Bengal but also the Mughal Emperor of India was defeated by the English. The victory made the English a great power in northern India and contenders for their supremacy over the whole country. After the battle, Mir Jafar, who was made Nawab in 1763 when the relations between Mir Qasim and the company became strained, agreed to hand over the districts of Mindapur, Bhadrava and Chittagong to the English for the maintenance of their army. The English were also permitted duty-free trade in Bengal except for a duty of 2% on salt. After the death of Mir Jafar, his minor son Najamuddaulah was appointed Nawab, but the real power of the administration lay in the hands of Naib Sobdar, which could be appointed or dismissed by the English. Now the Treaty of Allahabad. Robert Clive concluded two important treaties at Allahabad in August 1765, one with the Nawab of Awadh and the other with the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. Nawab Sujauddaulah agreed to surrender Allahabad and Kara to Emperor Shah Alam II, pay rupees 50 lakh to the company as war indemnity and gave Balwant Singh, Zamindar of Banaras, full possession of his estate. Now the Shah Alam II agreed to reside at Allahabad to be ceded to him by the Nawab of Awadh under the company's protection. Issues a farman getting a Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa to the East India Company in lieu of an annual payment of rupees 26 lakh and a provision of rupees 53 lakh the company in return for Nizamat functions, military defense, police and administration of justice of the said provinces. Clive did not want to annex Awadh because it would have placed the company under an obligation to protect an extensive land frontier from the Afghan and the Maratha inventions. The treaty made the Nawab a firm friend of company and turned Awadh into the buffer state. Similarly, Clive's agreement with Shah Alam II was inspired by practical considerations. It made the emperor's useful rubber stamp of a company. Besides, the emperor's farman legalized the political gains of the company in Bengal. Mir Qasim, the dethroned Nawab of Bengal, spent the rest of his life in abject misery and homeless wandered and died in June 1777. Now the dual government in Bengal 1765 to 72. After the Battle of Buxar, the East India Company became the real masters of Bengal. Robert Clive introduced the dual system of government, that is the rule of the two, the company and the Nawab in Bengal, in which the both Diwani, that is the collecting revenues, and Nizamat, that is police and judicial functions, came under the control of company. The company exercised Diwani rights as the Diwan and the Nizamat rights through the right to nominate the deputy Sobdar. The company acquired the Diwani functions from the emperor and Nizamat functions from the Sobdar of Bengal. The system held a great advantage for the company. It left the appearance of authority to the puppet Indian ruler. while keeping their sovereign power in the hands of the company. The Nawab was responsible for maintaining peace and order, but he depended both for funds and forces upon the company because they later controlled the army and revenues. For the exercise of Diwani functions, the company appointed two deputy Diwans, Muhammad Riza Khan for Bengal and Raja Sitab Roy for Bihar. Muhammad Riza Khan also acted as a deputy Nizam of or deputy Shobda. The dual system led an administrative breakdown and proved disastrous for the people of Bengal. Neither the company nor the Nawab cared for administration and public welfare, wherein Hastings did away with the dual system in 1772. Now the Mysore's resistance to the company. First, the Wudiyar Mysore dynasty. After the Battle of Talikota, 5065, gave a deadly blow to the great kingdom of Vijayanagara. Many small kingdoms emerged from its remnants. In 1612, the Hindu kingdom under the Wudiyars emerged in the region of Mysore. Chikka Krishna Raja Wudiyar II ruled from 1734 to 1766 during the second half of the 18th century. Mysore emerged as a formidable power under the leadership of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. The English felt their political and commercial interests in South India was threatened because of Mysore's proximity with the French and Hyder Ali and Tipu's control over the rich trade of the Malabar coast. Mysore power was also seen as a threat to the control of the English over Madras. Now the rise of Hyder Ali. In the 18th century, two brothers, Najraj and the Sarvadhikari and Devraj Dulwai had reduced Chikka Krishna Wudiyar to mere puppet. Hyder Ali, born in 1721 in an obscure family, started his career as a horseman in the Mysore army under the ministers Majaraj and Devaraj. Though uneducated, he possessed a keen intellect and was a man of great energy and determination. Repeated incursions of the Marathas and of the Nizam's troops into the territories of Mysore resulted in heavy financial demands made by the aggression from Mysore. Mysore became financially and politically weak. The need of the hour was leader with high degree of military powers and diplomatic skill. Hyder Ali fulfilled that need and usurped the royal authority by becoming the de facto ruler of Mysore in 1761. He realized that the exceedingly mobile Marathas could be contained only by the swift cavalry, that the cannons of the French trained Nizami army could be silenced only by an effective artillery, and that the superior arms from the west could only be matched by arms thrown from the same place or manufactured with the same know-how. Hyder Ali took the help of French to set up an arms factory at Dindigul, now in Tamil Nadu, and also introduced Western methods of training for his army. He also started to use his considerable diplomatic skill to outmaneuver his opponents. With his superiority military skill, he captured Dodbalapur, Sira, Bidnur and Hoskate in 1761 to 1763 and brought to submission the troublesome Puligars of South India. In Tamil Nadu, now they recovering their defeat at Panipat, and Marathas under the Madhavrao attacked Mysore and defeated Hyder Ali in 1764, 66 and 71. To buy the peace, Hyder Ali had to give them large sum of money, but after the Madhavrao's death in 1772, Hyder Ali raided the Marathas a number of times during 1774 to 76 and recovered all the territories he had previously lost besides capturing new areas. Now the first Anglo-Mysore War, 1767 to 69. First of all, we will note the background. After the easy success in Bengal, the English were confident of their military strength. They concluded a treaty with the Nizam of Hyderabad 1766, persuading him to give the northern Sirkas region, in lieu of which they said that they would protect the Nizam from Hyder Ali. Hyder already had a territorial disputes with the Nawab of Akot and differences with the Maratha. Now the changing alliances. The Nizam, the Marathas and the English allied together against Hyder Ali. Hyder acted with considerable tact and diplomatic skill. He paid the Marathas to turn them neutral and promising to share conquered territories with the Nizam, converted the Nizam into his ally. He then joined the Nizam to attack the Nawab of Akot. Now the course of war. The war continued for a year and a half without any conclusion. Hyder changed his strategy and suddenly appeared before the gates of Madras. There was complete chaos and panic at Madras, forcing the English to conclude a very humiliating treaty with Hyder Ali on April 4, 1769. Treaty of Madras. The treaty provided for the exchange of prisoners and mutual restitution of conquests. Hyder Ali was promised the help of the English in case he was attacked by another power. Now the second Anglo-Mysore War. First of all, we will know the background. Hyder Ali accused the English of breach of faith and non-observance of the Treaty of Madras when in 1771 he was attacked by the Marathas and the English failed to come his aid. Also, he found that the French were much more helpful than the English in meeting the army requirements of guns, saltpeter and lead. Consequently, Mahi, French possession on the Malabar coast, some French war material was brought to Mysore. Meanwhile, the American War of Independence had broken out, in which the French were on the side of the rebels against the English. Under the circumstances, Hyder Ali's friendship with the French caused even more concern to the English. They therefore tried to capture Mahi, which Hyder Ali regarded to be under his protection, and Hyder considered the English attempted to capture Mahi a direct challenge to his authority. Now, the course of war, Hyder forged an anti-English alliance with the Marathas and the Nizam. He followed it up by an attack in the Carnatic, capturing Arcot and defeating the English army under the colonial Belle in 1781. In the meantime, the English under the Sir Iri Kuti detached both the Marathas and the Nizam from Hyder's side, but he undeterred. Hyder faced the English bodily only to suffer a defeat at Porto Nova in November 1781. However, he regrouped his forces and defeated the English and captured their commander Braithwaite. Treaty of Mangalore. Hyder Ali died of cancer on December 1782. Now his son Tipu Sultan carried on war for 1 year without any positive outcome, fed up with in an unconclusive war. Both sides opted for peace, negotiating the territory of Mangalore March 1784, under which each party gave back the territories it had taken from the other. Now the third Anglo-Mysore War. First of all, we will know the background. The dispute arose between Tipu and the state of Travancore. Travancore had purchased Jalkotal and Kannur from the Dutch into the Cochin state. As Cochin was a feudatory of Tipu, he considered an act of Travancore as a violation of his sovereign rights. So in April 1719, Tipu declared war against Travancore for his restoration of his rights. Now the course of war. The English siding the Travancore attacked Tipu. In 1719, Tipu defeated the English under General Meadows. In 1791, Cornwallis took a leadership and at the head of the large army marched through Amber and Vellore to Bangalore and to capture in March 1791, and from these Srirangapatnam, Coimbatore fell to them, but they lost it again and lost with the support of the Marathas and the Nizam. The English attacked Srirangapatnam for the second time. Tipu offered serious oppositions, but the odds were against them. Consequently, he had to pay heavily under the Treaty of Srirangapatnam. Now the Treaty of Srirangapatnam. Under this Treaty of 1792, nearly half of the Mysore territories was taken over by the victorious Baramahal, Dindigul and Malabar went to the English, while the Marathas got the regions surrounding and the Tungabhadra and its tributaries, and the Nizam occupied the areas from the Krishna to beyond the Pinar. Besides, a war damage of 3 crore rupees was also taken from Tipu. Half of the war indemnity was to be paid immediately, while the rest was to be given in installments, for which Tipu's 2 sons were taken as hostages by the English. Now the fourth Anglo-Mysore War. First of all, we will know the background. Same. The English as well as Tipu used a period 1792 to 1799 to recoup their losses. Tipu fulfilled all the terms of treaty of Srirangapatnam and got his sons released in 1769. When the Hindu ruler of Vodiyar dynasty died, Tipu refused to place Vodiyar minor son on the throne and declared himself Sultan. He also decided to avenge his humiliating defeat and the terms put by the Treaty of Srirangapatnam. In 1798, Lord Wellesley surrounded Sir John Shore as a new Governor General, and Imperialist to Core Wellesley was concerned about Tipu's growing friendship with the French and aimed at annihilating Tipu's independent existence or force him to submission through the system of subsidiary alliance. So that the charge sheet against the Tipu mentioned that he was plotting against the English with the Nizam and the Marathas, and he had sent emissaries to Arab, Afghanistan, Kabul, Zaman Shah, as also the Isla France, Maurice and Versailles with the reasonable intent. So the Tipu's explanation did not satisfy Wellesley. So the course of war. The war began on April 17, 1799 and ended on May 4, 1799, with the fall of Srirangapatnam, Tipu was defeated first by the English General Starat and then the General Harris. Arthur Wellesley, the brother of Lord Wellesley, also participated in the war. The English were again helped by the Marathas and the Nizam. The Marathas has been promised half of the territory of Tipu, and Nizam had directly signed the subsidiary alliance. Tipu laid down his life fighting bravely. His family members were interred at Vellore, and his treasures were confiscated by the English. The English chose a boy from the earlier Hindu royal family of Mysore as the Maharaja and also imposed on him the subsidiary alliance system. Now the Mysore after Tipu, Wellesley offered Sonda and Harponili districts of Mysore kingdom to the Marathas, which the latter refused. The Nizam was given the district of Kooty and Gumarkonda, and besides that the English took possession of Kanara, Vayand, Coimbatore, Davarpuram and Srirangapatnam, and the new state of Mysore was handed over to the old Hindu dynasty Vodiyas under the minor ruler Krishnaraja III, who accepted the subsidiary alliance. In 1831, William Benedict took control of Mysore on grounds of misgovernance. In 1881, Ripon restored the kingdom to its ruler. Now the Anglo-Maratha struggle for supremacy. Rise of the Marathas. As the Mughal Empire declined, one of the staunchest and the hardest of the empire's adversaries, the Marathas got a chance to rise in power. They controlled a large portion of the country. Besides, they also received tributes from the areas not directly under the control. By the middle of the 18th century, they were in Lahore, thinking of becoming the rulers of the northern India. So in the court of the Mughals, playing the role of kingmakers. Through the third battle of Panipat, 1761, in which they were defeated by Ahmad Shah Abdali, changed the situation. The group regained their strength and within the decade achieved a position of power in India. Bajirao first, 1720 to 40, considered greatest of all the Peshwas, and started a confederacy of prominent Maratha chiefs to damage the rapidly expanding Maratha power and some extent appease the Kastriya section of the Marathas. Peshwas were Brahmins led by the Senapati Dabodi. Under the arrangement of Maratha confederacy, each prominent family under the chief was assigned a sphere of influence, which he was supposed to conquer the rule. But in the same, then Maratha King Sahu, the Maratha families which emerged prominent were the Gaikwad of Bodha, the Bhonsle of Nagpur, the Holkars of Indore and Sindhias of Galevar, and the Peshwa of Pune. So cordially, but the third battle of Panipat 1761 changed everything. The defeat at Panipat and later the death of the young Peshwa Madhavrao I in 1772 weakened the control of the Peshwa over the confederacy through the chiefs of the confederacy united and occasion as against the British 1775 to 82. More often they quarreled among themselves. Now the entry of the English into the Maratha politics. The year between the last quarter of the 18th century and the first quarter of the 19th century witnessed the Marathas and the English clashing thrice for political supremacy, with the English emerging victorious in the end. And the cause of these conflicts was the inordinate ambition of the English and was the divided house of the Marathas that encouraged the English to hope for success in their venture. And the English in Bombay wanted to establish government on the lines of the arrangement made by Clive in Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. So it was a longed for opportunity for the English when the decisions over their succession divided the Marathas. Now the first Anglo-Maratha war. First of all, we will know the background. After the death of Madhavrao in 1772, his brother Narayan Rao succeeded his as a fifth Peshwa. However, the Narayan Rao's uncle Raghunath Rao and his nephew assassinated and named himself as the next Peshwa, though he was not a legal heir. And then Narayan Rao's widow Gangabai gave birth to the son. After her husband's death, the newborn infant was named by Savai I and the Kata. Madhavrao and he was legally the next Peshwa. 12 Maratha chiefs Barabai led the Nana Pandavas made an effort to name the infant as a new Peshwa and rule for him as regents. Now the treaties of Surat and Purandar. Raghunath Rao, unwilling to give up his position in power, sought help from the English at Bombay and signed the Treaty of Surat in 1775. Under the treaty, Raghunath Rao ceded the territories of Salasati and Basin to the English, along with the portion of the revenues from Surat and Bharuch districts. In return, the English were to provide Raghunath Rao with 2,500 soldiers. So the British Calcutta Council on the other side of the India condemned the Treaty of Surat 75. And they sent colonial Upton to Pune to annul it and make the new treaty of Purandar in 1776. With the Regency renouncing Raghunath and promising him a pension, the Bombay government rejected this and gave refuge to Raghunath. In 1777, the Nana Pandavas violated his treaty, and with the Calcutta Council by generating the French a port on the west coast, the English retaliated by sending a force towards Pune. Now the course of war, the English and the Maratha armies met on the outstrikes of Pune. Though the Maratha army had a larger number of soldiers than the English and later had highly superior ammunition and cannons. However, the Maratha army was commanded by a brilliant general named Mahadji Scindia, also known as Mahaji Sindhi, and Mahadji ruled the English army into the Ghats mountain passes near Teligaon, and they trapped the English from all sides and attacked the English supply base at Kopali. And the Marathas also utilized a scorched earth policy, burning farmland and poisoning wells. As the English began to withdraw to Teligaon, the Marathas attacked, forcing them to retreat to the village of Vedgaon. Here the English army was surrounded on all sides by the Marathas and cut off from food and water supplies. The English surrounded by mid-January 1779 and signed a treaty of Vedgaon that forced the Bombay government to relinquish all territories acquired by the English since 1775. Now the Treaty of Salabi 1782, end of the first phase of the struggle. So in this phase, Warren Hastings, the Governor General in Bengal, rejected the Treaty of Vedgaon and sent a large force of soldiers under the colonial Godard, who captured Ahmedabad in February 1779 and the Basin in December 1780. Another Bengal detachment led by Captain Poham captured Gavalia in August 1780. In February 1781, the English under General Kamek finally defeated Scindia at Sipri. Now the Scindia proposed a newly treaty between the Peshwa and the English, and the Treaty of Salabi was signed in May 1782. It was ratified by Hastings in June 1782 and Pandavas in February 1783. And the treaty guaranteed peace between the two sides of the 20 years. The main provisions of the Treaty of Salabi were the Salsati should continue in the possession of English. The whole of the territory conquered since the Treaty of Purandar 1776, including Basin, should be restored to the Marathas. And in Gujarat, Fetch Singh Gaikwad should remain in the possession of the territory which he had before the war and should serve the Peshwa as before. And the English should not offer any further support to Raghunath Rao, and the Peshwa should grant him a maintenance allowance. And besides that, the Hyder Ali should return all the territory taken from the English and the Nawab of Akot, and the English should enjoy the privileges at trade as before, and the Peshwa should not support any other European nation. The Peshwa and the English should undertake that their several allies should remain at peace with one another, and the Mahadaji Scindia should be the mutual guarantor for the proper observance of the terms of treaty. Now the Second Anglo-Maratha War 1803 to 05. Background: the Second Anglo-Maratha War was started in the circumstances similar to those of the first, after the Peshwa Madhavrao Narayan committed suicide in 1795, and Bajirao II, the worthless son of the Raghunath Rao, became the Peshwa, and Nana Pandavas, a bitter foe of Bajirao II, became the chief minister, and decisions among the Marathas provided the English with an opportunity to intervene in Marathas affairs, and the death of Nana Pandavas in 1800 gave the British an added advantage. Now the course of war: on April 1st, 1801, the Peshwa brutally murdered the brother of Jaswant Rao, also called the Yashwant Rao by some historians. Holkar Vithuji, furious Jaswant, arrayed his forces against the combined armies of Scindia and Bajirao II. The turmoil continued, and on October 25, 1802, Jaswant defeated the armies of Peshwa and Scindia devastatingly at Hadapsa near the Pune, and placed Vinayakaru, son of the Amrit Rao, on the Peshwa seat. As terrified Bajirao II fell to the Basin, where on December 31, 1802, he signed a treaty with the English. Now the Treaty of Basin 1802. Under this treaty, the Peshwa agreed to receive from the company a native infantry consisting of not less than 60,000 troops, with the usual proportion of the field artillery and European artillery men attached to be permanently sectioned in his territories, and to cede the company territories, yielding an income of rupees 26 lakh, and to surrender the city of Surat, and to give up all claims of out on the Nizam's dimensions and to accept the company's ambition in all the differences between him and the Nizam of the Gaekwad, and not to keep in his employment Europeans of the nation at war with the English and to subject his relations with the other sides of the control of the English. Now the reduced of Velasquez, after the Peshwa accepted the subsidiary alliance, India and Bhosle attempted to save Maratha independence, but the well-prepared and organized army of the English under the Arthur Velasquez defeated the combined armies of Scindia and Bhosle and forced them to conclude separate subsidiary treaties with the English. In 1804, Jaswant Holkar made an attempt to form a coalition of Indian rulers to fight against the English, but his attempt proved unsuccessful. The Marathas were defeated and reduced to British villages and isolated from one another. And the defeat of Bhosle, December 17 to 1803, Treaty of Devgaon, and defeat of Scindia, December 30, 1803, Treaty of Surajinjao, and the defeat of Holkar, 1806, in the Treaty of Rajpur Ghat. Now the significance of the Treaty of Basin. Immediately, the treaty was signed by the Peshwa, who lacked political authority, but the gains made by the English were immense, and the provision of keeping English troops permanently in Maratha territory was a great strategical benefit. And the company already had troops in Mysore, Hyderabad, and Lucknow, and the addition of Pune on the list meant that the company troops were now more evenly spread and could be rushed any place without any delay in the times of need. So the Treaty of Basin did not hand over India to the company on a platter. It was a major development in that direction. The company was now well placed to expand its areas of influence. In the circumstances, the observation that treaty gave the English the key to India may be exaggerated, but appears understandably. Now the Third Anglo-Maratha War. So the background of Third Anglo-Maratha War was the Lord Hastings had an imperialistic decision of imposing British paramountcy. By the Charter Act of 1813, the East India Company monopoly of trade in China except tea ended, and hence the company needed more markets. The Pindaris, made up of many castes and classes, were attached to Maratha armies as mercenaries, where the Marathas became weak and Pandiris could not get regular employment. As a consequence, they started plundering neighboring territories, including those of the company. The English charged the Marathas with giving shelter to the Pandiris, and Pandiri leaders like Amir Khan and Green Khan surrendered. The Chitu Khan fell into the jungles, and the Treaty of Basin, described as a treaty with the Chippa and the Peshwa, wounded the feelings of the other Maratha leaders, and the Peshwa the treaty as an absolute surrender of independence. And Lord Hastings' actions against the Pindirs were soon be transgression of the sovereignty of the Marathas, and they served to once again unite the Maratha Confederacy. And rampant Bajirao II made the last bid in 1817 by rallying together the Maratha chiefs against the English in course of the Third Anglo-Maratha War. Now the course of war, during course of war, the Peshwa attacked the British residency at Pune. Appa Sahib of Nagaur attacked the residency at Nagaur, and the Holkar made preparations for war, but by then the Marathas had lost almost all these elements which are needed for the growth of the power, and the political administrative conditions of all Maratha states were confused and inefficient. After the death of Jaswant Holkar, Tulsi Bai, the Holkar favorite mistress, come to help them on the affairs in Pune. Through the clever and intelligent woman, she could not administer the state properly because she was influenced by some unworthy men such as Balram Singh, Amir Khan, and the Bhosle of Nagpur, and the Scindia at Gwalior had also become weak. So the English, striking back vigorously, succeeded in not allowing the Peshwa to exert his authority again on the Marathas Confederacy. The result come out, the Peshwa was defeated at Khikri, Bhosle at Sitabudli, and Holkar at Mindapur. Some important treaties were signed. These were the Treaty of Pune, it was signed in June 1817 with Peshwa, and Treaty of Gwalior, it was signed in November 1817 with Scindia, and Treaty of Mandsaur, it was signed in January 1818 with Holkar. In June 1818, the Peshwa finally surrendered and the Maratha Confederacy was dissolved. The Peshwa was abolished. Peshwa Bajirao became the British retainer at Bithur near Kanpur, and Pratap Singh, a lineal descendant of Shivaji, was made ruler of small principality. Satara formed out the Peshwa's dominions. Now we are going to know why the Marathas lost. There were several reasons for the Marathas defeated by English. The main reasons are in-depth leadership. The Maratha state was despotic in character. The personality and character of the head of the state had a great bearing on the affairs of the state. But unfortunately, the later Maratha leaders Bajirao II, Daulat Rao, Scindia, and Jaswantrao Holkar were worthless and selfish leaders. They were not matched for the English officials such as Elphinstone, John McCallum, and Arthur Wallis, who later led the English to conquer Napoleon. After that, the defective nature of Maratha state, the cohesion of the people of the Maratha state was not organic but artificial and accidental, and hence precarious. So there was no effort right from the days of Shivaji for the well throughout organized communal improvement and spread of education or unification of the people, and the rise of Maratha state was based on the religio-national movement. And the defect of the Maratha state became glaring when they had to contend with the European power organized on the best pattern of the West, and they lose their political setup because the Maratha Empire was losing their consideration under the leadership of Chhatrapati, and later the Peshwa and powerful chiefs such as Gaikwad and Hoka, the Scindia and the Bhonsle carved out semi-independent kingdoms for themselves and paid lip service to the authority of Peshwa. Further, there existed in irreconcilable hostility between the different units of the confederacy. The Maratha chief often took sides with one of the other. The lack of a cooperative spirit among the Maratha chiefs proved detrimental to the Maratha state and inferior military system. Though all full and personal powers and value, the Marathas were inferior to the English in organization of the forces, in war weapons and discipline and accent, in an effective leadership, and centrifugal tendencies of divided command accounted for much of the Maratha failures, and the treachery in the ranks was instrumental in weakening the Maratha forces, and the adoption of modern techniques of warfare by the Marathas were inadequate, and the Marathas neglected the paramount importance of artillery. Through the Pune government set up an artillery department, it had already hardly functioned effectively. And the unstable economic policy, the Maratha leadership failed to evolve a stable economic policy to suit the changing needs of the time. There were no industries or foreign trade openings, so the economy of the Maratha was not conducive to a suitable political setup. Now the superior English diplomacy and espionage. The English had better diplomatic skills to win allies and isolate the enemy, and disunity among the Maratha chiefs simplified the task of the English. So the diplomatic superiority enabled the English to take a quick offensive against their target. Unlike the Marathas' ignorance and lack of information about their enemy, the English maintained a well-keyed spy system to gather knowledge of their potentialities, strengths, weakness, and military methods of their foes. And the progressive English outlook, the English were rejuvenated by their forces of Renaissance and compensating them from the shackles of the church. They were devoting their energies to scientific inventions and extensive ocean voyages and acquisition of the colonies. Indians, on the other hand, were still steeped in the medievalism, marked by an old dogmas and notions. The Maratha leaders paid very little attention to the mundane matters of the state, insistence on maintenance of traditional social hierarchy based on the dominance of the priestly class, trade and union of the empire difficult. In the end, it can be concluded that English attacked a divided house which started crumbling after the few pushes. Now the conquest of Sindh in the early 19th century, the English started show an interest in Sindh, where they enjoyed some trade facilities authorized by the Farman of the Mughal Emperor in 1630. The Farman provided the English with such privileges in the ports of Sindh, which they enjoyed elsewhere. Now the rise of Talpuras Emirs. In the 18th century, prior the rule of the Talpuras Emirs, Sindh was ruled by the Kolara chief in 1758. An English factory was built at Thata owing to the parwana given by the Kolar prince. Ghulam Singh in 1761, Ghulam Singh on the arrival of the English resident in his court not only ratified the early treaty but also excluded other Europeans from trading there, and the advantage was enjoyed by English up to the 1775. With a non-too-friendly ruler, Sarfaraz Khan made the English close their factory. In 1770th century, the Baloch tribe called Talpuras descended from the hills and settled in the plains of Sindh. They were excellent soldiers as well as adapted to hard life. They acquired great influence and soon absurd power in the new region. And in 1783, the Talpuras, under the leadership of Mir Fatah Ali Khan, established a complete hold over the Sindh and sent the Kalora prince to exile. And then the Durrani monarch confirmed the claims of Mir Fatah Khan and ordered the latter to share country with his brothers, Mir brothers, popularly known as Charyar, with Mir Fatah. And after that, Mir Fatah died in 1800, and Charyar divided the kingdom among themselves and calling themselves the emirs or lords of Sindh. And these emirs extended their domain on all sides, and they conquered Amarkot from Raja of Jodhpur, Karachi from Chief of Luz, and Shikarpur, Bukhara from the Afghans. And gradual ascendancy over the Sindh. A common belief in the late 18th century was that Napoleon was comprising with Tipu Sultan to invade India. In 1779, behind Lord Wellesley, the efforts to revive commercial relations with Sindh was a hidden aim to counteract the alliance of the French. And Tipu Sultan and Shah Zaman, the Kabul monarch, negotiations were opened with Fatah Ali Khan, but under the influence of the Tipu and the jealousy of the local traders aided the anti-British party at Hyderabad, Sindh, and the Emir in October 1800 ordered the British agent to quit the Sindh within 10 days, and the British agent crew left Sindh and the company quietly suffered the insult. After that, the Treaty of Eternal Friendship, it was seen in June 1807. The alliance of the Tilsit and Alexander I of Russia was joined by Napoleon Bonaparte. The alliance had as one of its conditions a combined invasion of India by the land route. Now the British wanted to create a barrier between Russia and British India. To achieve this, Lord Minto sent 3 delegations under the leadership of various prominent persons to forge alliances. According to Maclay was sent to Lahore, Elphinstone to Kabul, and McCallum to Tehran. So Sindh was visited by Nicholas Smith, who met the emirs to conclude a defensive arrangement after the negotiations, and the emirs agreed to treaty, their first ever treaty with the English, and after professing eternal friendship, both the sides agreed to exclude the French from Sindh, and they exchanged agents of each other courts. Their treaty was renewed in 1820 with the addition of the article excluding the Americans and resolving some border disputes on the side of Kutch after the final defeat of Marathas Confederacy in 1880. After that, the Treaty of 1832 was signed. In 1832, William Bentinck sent colonial Pottinger to Sindh to sign a treaty with the emirs. The provision of the treaty was follows like the free passage through Sindh would be allowed to English traders and travelers, and the use of Indus for trading purpose. However, no warships would play nor any materials for war would be carried, and no English merchant would settle down in Sindh, and passports would be needed for travelers, and tariff rates could be altered by the emirs if found high, and no military dues or tolls would be demanded, and the emirs would work with the Raja of Jodhpur to put down the robbers of Kutch, and the old treaties were confirmed, and the parties would not be jealous of each other. Now the Lord Auckland and Sindh. Lord Auckland, who became the Governor General in 1836, looked at Sindh for the perspective of saving India from a possible Russian invasion, and wished to obtain the counteracting influence over the Afghans. And Ranjit Singh in Punjab was strong enough to resist Kurquine in their regard, but the emirs were not. Thus the English viewed that they had to consolidate their position in Sindh as a necessary first step for their plans of Afghanistan. They do not get an opportunity with Ranjit Singh captured a frontier town of Sindhia. Rojan and Pottinger was sent to Hyderabad to sign a new treaty with the emirs. The treaty offered protection of the emirs on the condition that the company troops would be kept in the capital at the emirs' expense, or alternately the English would be given suitable concessions in return, and the emirs initially refused but later agreed reluctantly and to sign the treaty in 1838 when the possibility of Ranjit Singh getting help from others was pointed out to them, and the treaty permitted the English to intervene in the disputes between the emirs and the Sikhs, and also to establish the presence of British residents who could not anywhere he liked escorted by English troops. Thus Sindh was turned into the British protectorate in 1838. Now the Tripartite Treaty in 1838 was signed to address the Afghan problem as the British imagined it, and the company restored it further duplicity. First they persuaded Ranjit Singh to sign a Tripartite Treaty in June 1838 and agreeing to British mediation in his disputes with emirs, and then made Emperor Shah Shuja gave of his sovereign rights to Sindh, provided the arrears of tribute were paid, and the extent amount of the tribute was determined by the English, whose main objective was to obtain finances of the Afghan adventure and obtain so much of the Emir's territory and would be secure a line of operation against the Afghanistan through Sindh. Now the Sindh accepted subsidiary alliance. The company intended to persuade or compel the emirs to pay the money and also to consist to the abrogation of the article in the Treaty of 1832, which prohibited the movement of English troops in Sindh by land or river. B.L. Grover writes that under threat of superior forces, the emirs accepted a treaty in February 1839, which British subsidiary forces had to be stationed in Shikapur and Bukhara, and the emirs of Sindh were to pay rupees 3 lakh annually for the maintenance of the company's troops. Henceforth, the emirs were debarred from having any negotiations with foreign states without the knowledge of the company. Further, they were to provide a storeroom at Karachi for the company's military supply. Besides that, abolishing all tolls of the Indus and furnishing an auxiliary forces for the Afghan war if called upon to do so. Now the capitulation of Sindh, the first Anglo-Afghan War 1839 to 42 fought on the soil of Sindh, was never liked by the emirs of Sindh, neither did they like the presence of the British troops in the region. However, under the treaty they were asked to pay for all this, which they did. They not renewed and or thanked for their services, but were charged with hostility and disaffection against the British government, and the emirs were charged with reasonable activities against the British, and Ellenborough placed the precious positions due to the Afghan war reserves, sent Outram to Sindh to negotiate a new treaty with the treaty. The emirs were required to cede important provisions as a price of their past transaction, to supply fuel to the company's streams playing on the Indus, and to stop minting coins. Furthermore, in the succession dispute, the English intervened through Nepal and started a war when the emirs rose in revolt, and the whole of the Sindh capitulated within the short time, and the emirs were made captives and banished from Sindh. In 1843, under the Governor General Ellenborough, Sindh was merged into the British Empire, and Charles Nepal was appointed its first governor. Now the criticism of the conquest of Sindh. Historians generally condemn the execution of Sindh by the British in strong words. The cause of the annexation was deliberately manufactured. Like many episodes in the British conquest of India, the Afghan war is also a tale of bullying, tactics and deceit. And however, in the instance of the first Afghan war, the English suffered terribly in the hands of the Afghan, with the corresponding loss of the prestige. And to compensate of this, they annexed Sindh, which prompted Elphinstone to comment. Coming from Afghanistan, it put one in mind of the bully who had been knocked in the street and went home to beat his wife in revenge. Now the conquest of Sindh. Consolidation of Punjab under the Sikhs. After the murder of last Sikh Guru Gobind Singh, a section of Sikhs under the leadership of Banda Bahadur revolted against the Mughal during the rule of Bahadur Shah. In 1715, Banda Bahadur was defeated by Farrukh Shah and put to his death in 1716. Thus the Sikh polity once again became leaderless and later got divided into the two groups, Bandhani, that was liberal, and Tat Khalsa, orthodox. The rift among the followers ended in 1721 under the influence of Bhai Mani Singh. Later in 1784, Kapur Singh Haizulpuria organized the Sikhs under the Dal Khalsa with the objective of uniting followers of Sikhism politically, culturally and emotionally. The whole body of the Khalsa was formed into two sections, Buddha Dal and the Army of Veterans, and Purana Dal, the army of the young. The weakness of the Mughals and inventions of Ahmad Shah Abdali created a general confusion and anarchy in Punjab. So these political conditions helped the organized Dal Khalsa to consolidate further. The Sikhs consolidated in misls, which were military brotherhoods with a democratic setup. Misl is an Arabic word which means equal or alike. Another meaning of misl is state. During the period 1763 to 1773, many misls started to rule the Punjab region after the Sikh chieftains from Saharanpur in the east of the Atok, in the west from the mountainous regions of the north, and Multan in the south. Now the Sukracharya, Misl and Ranjit Singh. After the time of the birth of Ranjit Singh, November 2, 1780, there were 12 important misls. Aluwalia, Bhangi, Daliwalia, Fazulpuria, Kanhaya, Kroshingia, Matai, Nishania, Phulkia, Ramgaria, Sukhachakya and Shadid. The central administration of the misl was based on the Guru Mata Sangh, which was essentially a political, social, and economic system. Ranjit Singh was the son of Mohan Singh, the leader of the Skarcharya misl. Mohan Singh died when Ranjit Singh was only 12 old. But Ranjit Singh showed an early acumen to political affairs towards the close of the 18th century. All the important misls except Skarcharya were in the state of disintegration. Afghanistan was also engulfed in the civil war due to the power struggle, which went on for the next three decades. The events in the neighboring regions were fully exploited by the Ranjit Singh, who followed a ruthless policy of blood and iron and carved out for himself a kingdom in the central Punjab. In 1779, Ranjit Singh was appointed as a governor of Lahore by Zaman Singh as the ruler of Afghanistan. In 1805, Ranjit Singh acquired Jammu and Amritsar, and thus the political capital Lahore and the religious capital Amritsar of Punjab came under the rule of Ranjit Singh. He was also maintained good relations with the Dogras and Nepalese and enlisted them in the army. Now the Ranjit Singh and the English, the prospectus of the joint Franco-Russian invasion of India through the land route had alarmed the English in 1807. Lord Minto sent Charles Metcalfe into Lahore, so the Ranjit Singh offered to accept Metcalfe's proposal on the offensive and defensive alliance on the condition that the English would remain neutral in case of Sikh-Afghan war and would consider Ranjit Singh the sovereign of the entire Punjab, including the Malwa Sutlej territories. However, the negotiations failed. In the changed political scenario, it was a Napoleonic danger reduced by the English became more assertive. Ranjit Singh agreed to sign the Treaty of Amritsar April 25, 1809 with the company. In the Treaty of Amritsar was significant for its immediate violent potential effects, and it checked one of the most cherished ambitions of Ranjit Singh to extend his rule over the entire Sikh nation and to accept the river Sutlej as a boundary line of the dominance and the companies. Now he directed his energies towards the west and captured Multan 1818 and Kashmir 1819 and Peshawar in 1834. In June 38, Ranjit Singh was compelled by political compulsions to sign a tripartite treaty with the English. However, he refused to give passage to a British army through his territories to attack Dost Muhammad and Afghan emirs. And the relation of Raja Ranjit Singh was a company from 1809 to 1839 clearly indicated the former's weak position in and although he was continuous in of his weak position, and he took the step to organize coalition of other Indian princes to maintain a balance of power. And Ranjit Singh died in June 1839, and with his death the process of the decline of his empire began. Now the Punjab after the Ranjit Singh. Beginning of the court factions, Ranjit Singh's only legitimate son and successor Kharak Singh, who was efficient, and during the brief period of his reign, court factions become active. Kharak Singh's sudden death in 1839 and accidental death of his son Prince Nihal Singh. He was returning from his father's funeral, led to an anarchist situation in Punjab. Plans and counter plans of the various groups to capture the throne of the Lahore provided an opportunity for decisive action by the English. The army, the pillar of the Sikh state, was far less strong than appeared to be. Ranjit Singh's able generals Mohkam Chand, Diwan Chand, Hari Singh Nalwa, and Ram Dayal were already died. Already discontent was growing among the troops as a result of irregularity of the payment. The appointment of the unworthy officers led to the indiscipline. The Lahore government continuing their policy of friendship with the English and permitted the British troops to pass through its territory. Once when they were fleeing from Afghanistan, and again when they were marching back to Afghanistan to avenge their defeat. These marches resulted in commotion and the economic desolation in Punjab. Now the Rani Jindal and Dalip Singh, after the death of Nihal Singh, Sher Singh, another son of the Ranjit Singh, succeeded, but he was murdered in late 1843. Soon afterwards, Dalip Singh, a minor son of the Ranjit Singh, was proclaimed the Maharaja with Rani Jindal as regent and Hira Singh Dogra as Wazir. Hira Singh himself fell a victim to a court intrigue and was murdered in 1844. And the new Wazir Jawahar Singh, the brother of Rani Jindal, soon incurred the displeasure of the army and was deposed and put to death in 1845. Lal Singh, a lover of Rani Jindal, who over the army to his side and became the Wazir in the same year, and Teja Singh was appointed as a commander of the forces. Now the first Anglo-Sikh War, 1845 to 46. First of all, we will know the causes. The outbreak of the first of the Anglo-Sikh War has been attributed to the action of the Sikh army crossing the river Sutlej on December 11, 1845. This was seen an aggressive maneuver that provided the English with a justification to declare war. The causes were, however, much more complex and may be listed as follows: the anarchy in the Lahore kingdom following the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, resulting in the power struggle for domination between the court at Lahore and ever powerful and increasingly royal army, and the suspicious among the Sikh army arising from the English military campaigns to achieve the annexation of Gwalior and Sindh in 1841, and the campaign in Afghanistan in 1842, and the increase in the number of English troops being stationed near the border with the Lahore kingdom. Now the course of war. The war began in December 1845 with the 20,000 to 30,000 troops in British side, while the Sikh had about 50,000 men under the overall command of Lal Singh. But the tragedy of Lal Singh and Teja Singh caused 5 successive defeats of the Sikhs at Mudki, December 18 to 1845, Firoz Shah December 21 to 22, 1845, and Budiwal, Aliwal January 28 to 1846, and at Sobraon February 10 to 1846. Lahore fell to the British forces on February 20, 1846 without a fight. Now the Treaty of Lahore, March 8 to 1846. The end of the First Anglo-Sikh War forced the Sikhs to sign a humiliating treaty on March 8, 1846. The main features of the Treaty of Lahore was the war indemnity of the more than 1 crore rupees was to be given to the English, and Jalandhar Doab between the Bias and the Sutlej was annexed to the company's dominance, and a British resident was to be established at Lahore under Henry Lawrence, and the strength of the Sikh army was reduced, and Dilip Singh was recognized as the ruler under Rani Jindan as regent and Lal Singh as vizier. Now the sins, the Sikhs were not able to pay the anti-war indemnity, so the Kashmir including Jammu was sold to Gulab Singh, and he was required to pay rupees 75 lakh to the company as the price, and transfer of Kashmir to Gulab Singh was formalized by the separate treaty on March 16, 1846. Now the Treaty of Boriwal. The Sikhs were not satisfied with the Treaty of Lahore over the issue of Kashmir, so they rebelled in December 1846. The Treaty of Boriwal was signed. According to the provisions of the treaty, Rani Jindan was removed as regent, and the Council of Regency for Punjab was set up, and the council consisted of 8 Sikh Sardars persisted over the English resident Henry Lawrence. Now the Second Anglo-Sikh War, 1848 to 49. The causes of the war, that was the defeat in the First Anglo-Sikh War, and the provisions of the treaties of Lahore and Boriwal were highly humiliating for the Sikhs, and inhuman treatment meted out the Rani Jindan, who was sent to Banaras as a pensioner, added to the resentment of the Sikhs. Mulraj, as governor of Multan, was replaced by the new Sikh governor over the issue of increase in annual revenue. Mulraj recruited and murdered 2 English officers accompanying the new governor, and Sher Singh was sent to suppress and report, but he himself joined Mulraj, leading to the mass uprising in Multan. This could be considered as the immediate cause of the war, and then Governor General of the India, Lord Dalhousie, a hardcore expansionist, got the pretext of an annexed Punjab completely. Now the course of war. Lord Dalhousie himself proceeded to Punjab. 3 important battles were fought before the final annexation of Punjab. These were the Battle of Ramnagar, led by Sir Hugh and the commander-in-chief of the company, and the Battle of Jallianwala, January 40, 1849, and the Battle of Gujarat, February 21 to 1849. The Sikh army surrendered the Rawalpindi, and their Afghan allies were chased out of India. Gujarat is a small town on the banks of river Jhelum. The result came at the end of the war. It led to the surrender of the Sikh army and Sher Singh in 1849, annexation of Punjab, and for his servants the Earl of Dalhousie was given the thanks to the British Parliament, and a promotion in Prague as Marquess. The setting of the 3-member board of government Punjab, comprising of Lawrence brothers Henry and John, and Charles Mansell. In 1853, a board was nullified and Punjab was placed under the Chief Commissioner. John Lawrence became the first Chief Commissioner. Now the significance of the Anglo-Sikh Wars gave the 2 sides of the mutual respect each other, fighting powers, and Sikh were to fight loyally on the British side in the revolt of 1857 and in many other campaigns and wars up till the Indian independence in 1947. Now the extension of the British paramountcy through the administrative policies. The process of imperial expansion and consolidation of British paramountcy was carried on by the company's company during 1757 to 1857 period through twofold model: the policy of annexation by conquest of war, and B, policy of annexation by diplomacy and administrative mechanisms. We are already discussed how company defeated and subjugated by one, and the major powers like Bengal, Mysore and Marathas, and the Sikh mainly by waging wars against them and through considerable deficit. But in the case of many other powers, the British applied diplomatic and administrative policies in their context. We may cite the examples of Warren Hastings, ring fence policy, Wellesley system of subsidiary alliance, and Dalhousie doctrine of lapse. So, to see how British dominion expanded in India. Now, the policy of ring fence, it was given by Van Hastings. He took charge as the Governor General at a critical period of British rule, when the British were to be encounter the powerful combination of the Marathas, Mysore and Hyderabad. And he followed a policy of ring fence, which aimed at creating buffer zones to defend the company's frontiers. Broadly speaking, it was the policy of defense their neighbors' frontiers for safeguarding their own territories. The policy of Warren Hastings was reflected in his war against the Marathas and Mysore. The chief danger of the company territories was from the Afghan invaders and the Marathas. To safeguard against these dangers, the company undertook to organize the defense of the frontiers of the Awadh, and on the condition that Nawab would defray the expenses of a defending army, and the defense of Awadh constituting the defense of Bengal during that time. Thus, the states brought under the ring fence system were assured of military assistance against the external aggression, but in their own expense. In other words, their allies were required to maintain subsidiary forces, which were to be organized and equipped, commanded by officers of the company, who in turn were to be paid by the rulers of these states. Well as say policy of subsidiary alliance, one might in fact an extension of the ring fence system, which sought to reduce the Indian states into the position of dependence on the British government. Now, the subsidiary alliance. The subsidiary alliance system was used by Lord Wellesley, who was the Governor General of from 1798 to 1805, to build an empire in India. Under this system, the allying Indian states ruler was compelled to accept the paramount stocking of the British force within the territory and paid a subsidy for its maintenance. The Indian ruler had to agree to posting of a British resident in his court, and the Indian ruler could not employ any European in his service without the prior consultation with the company, nor he could go for the war to negotiate with other Indian rulers without consulting the Governor General. In return for all of this, the British would defend the rule of from his enemies and adopted a policy of non-interference in the internal matters of the allied states. One of the objectives behind Wellesley's strengthening of the subsidiary alliance was to keep the French from reviving and expanding their influence in India. Around the time of the fear of Napoleon expanding towards the east was very real for the British, who felt that the French could attack the western coast of India from their colony of Mauritius, and hence the clause in the alliance treaty requiring the Indian rulers to dispense Europeans other than the British from their service and not employ any. By means of their system, the company could station its forces at strategic location and keep the French at bay. Besides, the subsidiary alliance would expand the company's hold over the Indian states and gradually bring more and more territory to the company's fold. And the Indian rulers lost their independence by buying security. They were not free of interference from the British resident. They lost much of their revenue paying for their British troops. Also, the alliance made the Indian rulers weak and irresponsible, and the subjects were exploited, and it was practically impossible to dispose the oppressive rulers as they were protected by the British. Now, the evolution and perfection. It was probably Dupleix who first gave on hire to say European troops to Indian rulers to fight their wars. Since then, almost all the governor generals from Clive onwards applied a system of various Indian states and brought it to near perform function. And the first Indian state to fall in the protection trap, which anticipated the subsidiary alliance system with Awadh, which in 1765, and signed a treaty under the company pledged to defend the frontiers of Awadh and condition of the Nawab defraying the expenses of such defense. It was in 1787 that the company first insisted that the subsidiary state should not have any foreign relations. This was included in the territory of Nawab of Carnatic, which Cornwallis signed in February 1787. It was Wellesley Jennings to make it a general rule to negotiate for the surrender of territory in full sovereignty for the maintenance of the subsidiary force. Now let's know what are the stages of application of subsidiary alliance. There were 4 stages in the evolution of subsidiary alliance. The first stage in which the company offered to help a friendly Indian state with its troops to fight any war where the state might be engaged in, and the second stage consisted of making a common cause with the Indian state, now made friendly and taking the field within its own soldiers and those of the state. Now the third stage, when the Indian allies was asked not for men but for money. In return, the company promised that it would recruit, train and maintain the fixed number of soldiers under British forces, and that the contingent would be available to the ruler of his personal protection and also keeping out aggressors. In the fourth and last stage, the money of the protection fee was fixed, usually the high level which the state failed to pay money in time. It was asked to cede certain parts of the territories to the company in lieu of payment, and the company's entry into the affairs of the state had begun. Now it would be for the British resident install the state capital under the territory to initiate, sustain and hasten in the process of eventual annexation. Now the states which accepted alliance, the Indian princes who accepted the subsidiary alliance were the Nizam of Hyderabad in September 1798 to 1800, and the ruler of Mysore 1799, the ruler of Tanjore October 99, and the Nawab of Awadh November 1801, and the Peshawar December 1801, and the Bhonsle Raja of Berar December 83, the Sindhia February 1804, and the Rajput states of Jodhpur, Jaipur, Machri and Bundi, and the ruler of Bharatpur 1880, and the Holkars were the last Maratha confederation to accept the subsidiary alliance in 1880. Now the doctrine of labors. In simple terms, the doctrine stated that the adopted son could be heir to his foster father's private property, but not the state. It was for the paramount power, the British, to decide whether to bestow the state on the adopted son or to annex it. The doctrine was stated to be based on Hindu law and Indian customs, but Hindu law was seemed to be somewhat inconclusive on this point, and the instances of Indian sovereign annexed the states of his vassal on account of lapse, that is leaving no issue as here. We rather rare, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh has annexed a few of his feudatory principalities on account of lapse. Likewise, the company in 1802 acquired a few petty just sutlej states in the absence of heirs. Nonetheless, there was no clear-cut instance of an adopted son being deprived of an entire state, or of such a state being regarded as a lapse. Though this policy is attributed to Lord Dalhousie 1848 to 56, he was not its originator. It was a coincidence that during his governor generalship, several important cases arose in which the doctrine could be applied. Dalhousie showed too much zeal in enforcing this policy, which had been theoretically enunciated on some provisions occasions. So his procedures had acted on the general principle of avoiding annexation if it could be avoided. Dalhousie in turn acted on the general principle of annexing if he do not legitimately, and annexed lapsed status. It was a matter of the chance that during Dalhousie's term many rulers of the states died without a male issue, and 7 states were annexed under the doctrine of lapse. The most important of these were the Satara 1848 and Jhansi and Nagpur in 1854, and the other small states including the Jodhpur, Bundelkhand, Sambalpur, Orissa and Bhagat, Madhya Pradesh. And Lord Dalhousie annexed Awadh in 1856 after disposing Nawab Wajid Ali Shah on grounds of misgovernance. Thus, the Dalhousie annexed 8 states during his 8-year tenure, 1848 to 56 as Governor General. In these 8 years, he annexed some 250,000 square miles of the territory of India. His reign almost completed the process of expansion of British power in India, which began with the victory over the Siraj-ud-Dawla at Plassey in 1757. Now the relations of British India with the neighboring countries. The desire of the British imperialists to consolidate their administrative and political power in the region led them to conflict with the countries neighboring India's. Now the Anglo-Bhutanese War. The occupation of Assam in 1816 brought the British into the close contacts with the mountain state of Bhutan, and frequent raids of Bhutanese into the adjoining territories in Assam and Bengal, and the bad treatment meted out to Elgin envoys in 1863 to 64, and the treaty imposed on him, by which the British were forced to surrender the passes leading to Assam, and it led to the British annexation of these passes and stopping allowances paid to the Bhutanese in 1865, and Bhutanese were forced to surrender the passes in return for the annual subsidy. It was the surrender district which became the productive area with tea gardens. Now, Anglo-Nepalese relation. The Gurkhas wrested control of Nepal from the successors of Ranjit Malla of Badgaon in 1716. They began to expand their dominion beyond the mountains. They found it easier to expand their southern direction as the north was well defended by the Chinese. In 1801, the English annexed Gorakhpur, which brought the Gorkhas boundary and the company's boundary together. The conflict started during the Gorkhas capture of Butwal and Shiraj and the period of Lord Hastings 1830 to 23. The war ended in the Treaty of Sagoli 1816, which was in favor of British. As per the treaty, Nepal accepted the British resident. Nepal ceded the districts of Garhwal and Kumaon and abandoned claims of Terai. And Nepal also withdrew from Sikkim. And this agreement brought many advantages to the British. That British Empire now reached the Himalayas to acquire their better facilities for trade and with Central Asia, and acquired sites for hill stations such as Shimla, Missouri and Nainital, and Gorkha joined the British Indian Army in large numbers. And after that, the Anglo-Burmese relation came. In the beginning of the 19th century, Burma was free country and wanted to expand westward. The expansionists argued that the British fueled by the lure of the first resources of Burma. So the market for British manufacturers in Burma and the need to check French ambitions in Burma and the rest of the Southeast Asia resulted in 3 Anglo-Burmese wars, and in the end the annexation of Burma into the British India in 1885. Now the first Burma war 1824 to 26. The first war with Burma was fought when the Burmese expansion westwards and occupation of Arakan and Manipur and the threat to Assam and Brahmaputra Valley led to the continuous friction along the ill-defined border between Bengal and Burma. In the opening decades of the 19th century, the British expeditionary forces occupied Rangaon in May 1824 and reached within 72 km of the capital at Ava. And the place was established in 1826 with the Treaty of Yandabu, with the provider that the government of Burma pay rupees 1 crore as war compensation and cede its coastal provinces of Arakan and Dinasariam and abandon claims on Assam, Char and Janatia, and recognize Manipur as an independent state and negotiate a commercial treaty with Britain and accepted the British resident at Ava while posting the Burmese envoy at Calcutta. Now the second Burma War 1852. The second war was the result of the British commercial and the imperialistic policy of Lord Dalhousie. The British merchants were taken to get hold of timber resources of Upper Burma and also sought further inroads and Burmese market. So this time the British occupied Pegu, there on the remaining coastal province of Burma, and intense guerrilla existence had to be overcome before complete British control of the Lower Burma could be established. And the third Burma War 1885, after the death of Burmese Khan Bindan, his son Thibaw succeeded to the throne, and Thibaw from the beginning itself was hostile towards the British, and British merchants at Rangaon and Lower Burma had been complaining about the stepmotherly treatment by Thibaw, and who had been negotiating commercial treaties with the rival powers of France, Germany and Italy. And France also planned to lay a rail link from Mandalay to the French territory at the time when the British were in conflict with the French in Niger, and Egypt and Madagascar, and humiliating fine had been imposed on the British Timber Company by Thibaw, and Dufferin ordered the invasion and final annexation of Power Burma in 1885. Now the British had to face strong guerrilla uprisings in the whole of the Burma soon after, and the nationalist movement after the First World War. The Burmese nationalists joined hands with the Indian National Congress to weakening this link, and the Burma was separated from India in 1935, and Burmese nationalist movement further intensified under Yu Aung San. during the Second World War, which finally led to the independence of the Burma on January 4th, 1948. Now the Anglo-Tibetan relations. Tibet was ruled by the theocracy of Buddhist monks, imams, under the nominal suzerainty of China. The British efforts to establish friendly and commercial relations with Tibet had not yielded any result in the past, and deadlock it had been reached by the time of Curzon's arrival in India. The Chinese suzerainty over the Tibet was ineffective, and Russian influence at Lhasa was increasingly, and there were reports of Russian armies and ammunition coming into the Tibet. Curzon felt armed and sent a small Gurkha contingent under the control young husband on the special mission to Tibet to oblige the Tibetans to come to an agreement, and the Tibetans refused to negotiate and offered non-violent resistance, and young husband pushed his way into Lhasa August 94, with the Dalai Lama felled. After the Treaty of Lhasa 1904, young husband decided terms to the Tibetan officials, which provided that Tibetan would pay an indemnity of rupees 75 lakh at the rate of 1 lakh rupees per annum, and as a security of payment, the Indian government would occupy the Chumbi Valley territory between the Bhutan and Sikkim for 75 years, and Tibet would respect the frontier of Sikkim, and trade marts would be opened at Yotang, Gyanast, and Gatok, and the Tibet would not grant any concession for railway roads, telegraphs, etc. to any foreign state, but give Great Britain some control over the foreign affairs of Tibet. Later, on the instances of the Secretary of the State and true to the prelude given the Russia, the treaty was received during the indemnity from rupees 75 lakh to 25 lakh, and providing for evacuation of Chumbi Valley. After the 3 years, the valley was actually evacuated only in January 1908. Now the significance on the China gained in the end of the whole affair because of the Anglo-Asian Convention of 1907, provided that the two great powers would not negotiate Tibet except through the mediation of the Chinese government. However, Curzon's policy counteracted all Russian schemes in Tibet. Now the Anglo-Afghan relations. In the early 19th century, the increased Russian influence in Persia replaced British influence and thrived in an English scheme for establishment of new route by river Euphrates to India, especially after the Treaty of Turcomanchi 1828. The English got alarmed about the possible Russian plans regarding India. Soon they were in search of scientific frontier from Indian state side, and the passes of the northwest seemed to hold the key to enter India, and need was felt for Afghan to be under the control of the ruler friendly to the British. And forward policy of Auckland, who come to India as the Governor General in 1836, advocated a forward policy, and this implied the company government in India itself had to take initiatives to protect the boundary of British India for a probable Russian attack. This objective was to be achieved either through treaties with the neighboring countries or by the annexing them completely, and the Emir of Afghanistan, Dost Muhammad, wanted British friendship but made it conditional on the British helping him to recover Peshawar from the Sikhs, and a condition which British government in India rejected, and Dost Muhammad now turned to Russia and Persia for help. So this prompted the British government to go ahead with the forward policy, and a Tripartite Treaty 1838 was entered into by the British and Sikhs, and Shah Shuja, who had been deposited from Afghan throne in 1809 and had been living since the British pensioner at Ludhiana, and the treaty provided that the Shah Shuja be enthroned with the armored help of the Sikhs, and the company remaining in the background jingling the money bag, and Shah Shuja conduct foreign affairs with the advice of the Sikhs and British. Now the Shah Shuja gave up his sovereign rights over emirs of Sindh in return for a large sum of money. Besides that, the Shah Shuja recognized the Sikh ruler Maharaja Ranjit Singh claims over the Afghan territories on the right bank of the river Indus. Now the first Anglo-Afghan War 1839 to 42. Soon after the Tripartite Treaty in 1838, there came about the drastic change in the political situation of the region because of the removal of the original irritants. So the Persia lifted its siege of Herat, and Russia recovered its envoy from Kabul. Nevertheless, the British decided to go ahead with the forward policy. So this resulted in First Afghan War 1839 to 42, and the British intention was to establish a permanent barrier against the schemes of aggression. And from the northwest, the English army entered triumphantly into the Kabul after the August 1839 the successful attack, and most of the tribes had already been won over by bribes. Dost Muhammad surrendered 1840, and Shah Suja was made the Emir of Afghanistan. But Shah Suja was inaccessible to the Afghans. As soon as the British withdrew, their Afghans rose in rebellion, killing the garrison commander in Kabul. The British were compelled to sign a treaty 1841 with the Afghan chiefs, by which they agreed to evacuate Afghanistan and restore Dost Muhammad. But the English plan failed. Under the new expedition, the British reoccupied Kabul in September 1842. But having learned their lesson well, they arrived at a settlement with Dost Muhammad, by which the British evacuated from Kabul and recognized with him as independent ruler of Afghanistan. In the First Afghan War cost India 1.5 crore rupees and nearly 20,000 men. Now the John Lawrence and the policy of masterly inactive. John Lawrence 1864 to 1869 started a policy of masterly inactivity, which was a reaction of the disasters for the First Afghan War and an outcome of the practical common sense and an intimate knowledge for the frontier problem and the Afghan passion for independence. And even though Muhammad died in 1863, there was no interference in the War of Succession. Lawrence's policy rested on the fulfillment of two conditions: that the peace at the frontier was disturbed and no candidate in civil war sought foreign help, and the Sher Ali established himself a throne. Lawrence tried to cultivate friendship with him. Now the Latin and the policy of proud reserve. Latin, a nominee of the conservative government under the Benjamin Disraeli, 1874 to 80, became the Viceroy of India in 1876. He started a new foreign policy of proud reserve, which was aimed at having scientific frontiers and safeguarding and spheres of influence. According to the Latin, the relations with Afghanistan could no longer be left ambiguous. And the Second Anglo-Afghan War, 1780 to 80. Latin made an offer of an favorite territory of Sher Ali, but the Emir wanted friendship with both of his powerful neighbors, Russia and British India, while keeping both of them and an arm's length. And later Sher Shah refused to keep a British envoy in Kabul, while having earlier granted a similar concessions to the Russians, and Leighton was displeased, and when the Russians withdrew their envoy from Kabul, Leighton decided to invade Afghanistan. Sher Shah failed in the face of the British invasion, and the Treaty of Gandhama, May 1879, was signed with Yaqub Khan, the eldest son of Sher Ali. Now the Treaty of Gandhama, May 1879, the treaty signed after the Second Anglo-Afghan War, was provided that the Emir conducted his foreign policy with the advice of the Government of India, and a paramount British resident be stationed at Kabul, and Government of India gave Emir all support against the foreign aggressions and the annual subsidy. But soon Yaqub had abdicated under the popular pressure, and the British had to recapture Kabul and Kanda. Abdul Rahman became the new Emir. Biden chalked out a plan for the dismemberment of Afghanistan, but could not carry it out. Ripon abandoned his plan and decided on policy of keeping Afghanistan as a buffer state. After the First World War, the Russian Revolution 1917, the Afghan demanded full independence. Habibullah, who succeeded Abdul Rahman in 1901, was killed in 1919, and new ruler Amumullah decided upon open war on the British, and peace came in 1921 with Afghanistan recovered independence in foreign affairs. Now the British India and the northwest frontier. Successive Indian rulers tried to reach out to this region lying between the Indus and Afghanistan in their search of scientific frontier. The conquest of Sindh 1843 and the annexation of Punjab 1849 carried British boundaries beyond the Indus and brought them in contact with Baloch and Pathan tribes, who were mostly independent, but the Emir of Afghanistan claimed nominal suzerainty over them. During 1891 to 92, the British occupation of Hunza Nagar in Gilgit Valley, and where they passes commanding communications with Tral Alamad Abdur Rahman, Emir of Afghanistan, a compromise was finally reached by the drawing of a boundary line known as Doran Line between the Afghan and British territories. Emir received some districts and the subsidy was increased, but the Doran Agreement 1839-93 was failed to keep the peace in Soon, and there was a tribal uprising to Jagdish. A permanent British garrison was established at Tral and troops posted to guard Malakhan Pass, but the tribal uprisings continued till 1898. Now the Curzon, the viceroy between 1899 and 1905, followed a policy of withdrawal and concentration, and the British troops withdrew from the advanced posts, which were replaced by tribal levies and trained and commanded by British officers. He also encouraged the tribes to maintain peace, and he created the Northwest Frontier Province (NWFP) directly under the government of India. Earlier, it was under the control of Lieutenant Governor of Punjab. So the overall Curzon's policies resulted in the peaceful Northwest Frontier. The peaceful conditions continued thereafter with occasional tribal uprising. In January 1932, it was announced that the NWFP was to be constituted as the governor's province since 1947. The province belongs to Pakistan. I hope you find this video informative. Hope you like the video. Thank you for watching it.